Welcome back to Tech Stack for all you tech enthusiasts. This is part 2 of our React series. In this part, we will cover default props, set default values for props, passing HTML with props, send HTML content via props, control components, form elements managed by state. We will also revisit updating specific properties of an object state, modify individual properties in state, useEffect, perform side effects and components, inline styles, apply styles directly in JSX, external CSS, styles and separate CSS files, CSS modules, component-scoped CSS classes. In this video, we will talk about default props. Default props will be used when no prop is passed to a component. We will learn how to use styles in React. We will see how to pass HTML as props. Now we will implement default props. Now we create a new component department. We will use this component for default props. Now we add code for the department component. Now we will return JSX inside empty brackets, called fragments in React, in the department component. Inside the fragments, we will return the text department. Now we will use export default to make the department component available for use in other files. Now we will import the department component in app.jsx. Now we will use the department component as a self-closing tag. Now we will pass a prop called department name with the value department name. Now we will open department.jsx and receive the prop department name. Now we will display department name inside curly braces. Now we will open the terminal and run the command npm run dev. Now we will test it using localhost 5173 where it is running. Oops, it is not showing anything. We may have made some mistake. We passed a variable department name to the prop, which does not exist. The actual variable is department. Now we will test it again in the browser. Perfect. As you can see, it is showing HR. So now we will not pass any prop to the department component, as we will implement default props. As you see, when we pass nothing, it is showing nothing. So in case of nothing, we have to show some default value. Now we will set the default value to no department. So if no value is passed in props, no department will be shown. Now we will test it in the browser. As you can see, no department is showing. Now we will pass a value to the department component. Now we will test it again in the browser. As you can see, it is showing HR. Hopefully you understand default props. Now we will create a new component and apply the styles on it. Now we will create a new component called container. We will apply styles on this component. Now we will provide the code for the container component. Now we will return fragments in the container component. Now we will return the text container inside the fragments. Now we will add export default container. This will make the container component available to use in other files. Now we will import the container component in app.jsx. Now we will use the container component as a self-closing tag. Now we will pass a prop called color with the value blue to the container component. Now we will open the container component and receive the color prop. Now we will replace the fragment with a div in the container component. Now we will add the style attribute to the div. Now we will add the color attribute inside the style attribute. Now we will test it in the browser. As you can see, the container text is showing in blue color because we passed the color prop and applied it in the style attribute. Now we will pass another prop to apply more styles to the container component. Now we will pass the prop back color with the value black. Now we will set color to white for a matching look with back color. Now we will open container.jsx and receive the back color prop. Now we will update the style to use back color. Now we will test it in the browser. As you can see, the container text is showing with a black background and white color. Hope you understand how to use styles in React. Now we will pass HTML or JSX using props. So for the container, we will use opening and closing tags instead of a self-closing tag. Now inside the container tags, we will add an h1 tag. Inside it, we will show the text welcome to React 19. Now to receive HTML or JSX in the container, we will use children. In React, children is a special prop that holds the content between opening and closing tags. Now we will use children inside curly braces to display the past content. Now we will test it in the browser. You can see the HTML welcome to React 19 is showing, which we passed as a prop. Hope you understand how we can pass HTML or JSX as a prop. Now we will create a new component called employee form. We will first handle input field with state and then a drop-down with state. Now we will provide the code for the employee form component. Now we will return fragments in the employee form component. We add export default employee form to make the component available for use in other files. Now we will open app.jsx and use the employee form component as a self-closing tag. Remember to import it at the top, otherwise we will not be able to use the employee form component. Now we will use an input field in the employee form component. Let's open it. Now we will add an input field with type text. Now we will create state for the input using const name. Name is the state variable that stores the current value of the input field. setName is the function we use to update the value of the name state. useState is a React hook that lets us add state to a functional component. Sets the initial value of the state to an empty string. Now we will add an onChange event to the input text box. Now we will use setName inside the input using an arrow function. Now we will use the event parameter, and inside setName, we will use event.target.value. Now inside curly braces, we will display name as well. So when we change the input text box, it will update and show the value. Now we will test it in the browser. As you can see, when we change the text box value, it is displayed in real time while typing. Now we will implement a select drop-down with state. Let's create the select element. Now we will add 3 options to the select drop-down. In the first option, we will add the text select option and set its value to an empty string. In the second option, we will add the text React. In the third option, we will add the text view. Now we will set the respective values for the options. Value equals React for React and value equals View for View. Now we will create state for the select dropdown. We will use course as the state variable and set course as the function to update it, initializing with an empty string. Now we will use the onChange event on the select dropdown to update the course state with the selected value using setCourse. Now we will display the selected value inside parentheses in a paragraph tag, so when we change the dropdown, we can see the value as well. Now we will test it in the browser. You can see that when we change the drop-down value, it displays the selected value accordingly. Now we want to show a default value in the drop-down. We will use the default value property and set it to view. Now we will test it in the browser. You can see view is showing by default. Hopefully, using input and select with state is clear to you now. Now we will discuss control components. A control component in React is a component where form data is handled by the state. The input or select value is controlled by React through state, and any changes are updated via event handlers. Now we will create a form using ChatGPT. Create an HTML form without the body tag. That includes input fields for name, department, age, active checkbox, and GeneraTio. With no required attributes on any field. Do not worry, we will provide the prompt in the video description. As you can see, it has provided the required HTML. Let's copy it so that we can use it in our component. Now let's paste the form HTML into the employee form component. You can see a large number of errors because the input tags are not properly closed. In React, every input tag must have a closing slash. Now let's add a closing slash to all the input tags. It is still showing errors because the BR tags don't have a closing slash. Let's add a closing slash to all BR tags as well. Let's do it quickly using replace and replace all to add closing slashes to all tags. Now all the ending slash errors are fixed. Now let's check the form in the browser. You can see the form in the browser. Although the styling is not good, we will improve it using Bootstrap in later videos. Now we will add state for each form field. The state for the name field is already added. Now let's add state for the department field. Now let's add state for the age, active, and gender fields. Now we will create state for the age field using useState and initialize it with 0. Now we will create state for the active field using useState and set its initial value to false. Now we will create state for the gender field using useState and initialize it with an empty string. We have created state for all input fields and initialized each state properly. Now we will bind the input value with a name state using the value attribute. Now we will bind the department input by setting its value to the department state. Now we will bind the age input by setting its value to the age state. Now we will bind the checkbox by setting its checked attribute to the active state. Now we will bind the radio button by checking it when the gender state is equal to male. Now we will do the same for the female option, checking it when the gender state is equal to female. Now we will use the onChange event to update the name state using setName. Now we will set the name state using the input value from the event target. Now we will do the same for the department field, using the onChange event to update the department state with the selected value. Now we will do the same for the age field, using the onChange event to update the age state with the selected value. Now we will do the same for the active checkbox, updating the active state based on whether the checkbox is checked. Now we will handle the male gender radio button, using onChange to update the gender state with its value. Now we will handle the female gender radio button, using onChange to update the gender state with its value. Now we will display each form field value in a separate paragraph tag. The first paragraph tag will display the name value. Now we will create multiple paragraph tags to display all the form field values. In the first paragraph, we will show the name value from the state inside curly braces. Now we will do the same for the department, displaying its state value inside a paragraph. We will do the same for age. For the active field, we will show whether it is active or inactive based on the state value. The question mark here is part of a conditional expression. It checks if the value is true, then shows one thing. Otherwise, it shows another. Now we will do the same for gender, displaying the selected gender value from a state in a paragraph. Now we will set the respective label for each field, so each paragraph clearly shows which value belongs to which form field. Now let's test it in the browser. You can see that when we update each input field, the respective value is shown below. This is a complete control component. A control component in React is a component where form inputs are controlled by state. The input values come from the state, and any changes update the state through event handlers. Hopefully, you understand it now. Now, let's discuss useEffect. useEffect is a React hook that allows us to run side effect code after a component renders. It also lets us control when that code should run again by specifying dependencies, so it only reruns when those values change. When state changes, React re-renders the component to update the UI. This re-render is not a side effect. It is React doing its main job. A side effect is anything that happens because of that render, but is outside the UI, like API calls, console logs, DOM updates, local storage, timers. Those side effects are handled by useEffect. Now, let's create a counter component, and we will implement useEffect inside it. Now we will create a function called counter, and this function will act as our counter component. Now, inside the counter component, we will return fragment. Now we will export the counter component so it can be used in other files. Show text counter inside the fragment, just to confirm that the counter component is rendering properly. Now we will import the counter component into app.jsx, so we can use it there. Now we will use the counter component inside app.jsx by adding the counter component tag. Now we will open the terminal and run the project using npm run dev. Now open localhost 5173 in your browser to see that the counter component is loading. Perfect. The counter component is loading. Now we will create state for the counter. The count variable stores the current value of the counter. setCount is the function used to update the count state. Now we will import useState from React to create state in our counter component. We will initialize the state using useState with 0, so the counter starts at 0. Now we will remove the text counter from the fragment so we can add the actual counter elements. Now we will add a button with the text increment inside the fragment. Now we will add an onClick event to the button that increases the count by 1 using setCount. We use curly braces to display the value of the count state inside the paragraph. Now we will add console log count to see the count value in the browser console whenever it changes. Now let's test it in the browser. You can see the value is incrementing on each button click. Let's inspect the element to check the console and see the count values. You can see that on each button click, there are multiple console entries. This happens because React re-renders the component whenever the state changes. We can fix this by placing our code inside useEffect. In useEffect, the first part is an arrow function, and inside it we put the code that we want to run after the component renders. The next part of useEffect is the dependency array. If we pass a state inside the array, the code inside useEffect runs only when that state changes. If we pass an empty array, the code runs only once after the first render. Now we will place console.log inside useEffect. Since the dependency array is empty, this will run only once after the first render. Now let's test it in the browser. Open the inspect element in the browser to see the console output. You can see that when we click increment, the number increases, but nothing is shown in the console because the dependency array is empty. Now we will add the count state to the dependency array and test it again in the browser. This way, the code inside useEffect will run whenever the count changes. You can see that when we click increment, the number increases and also shows in the console. This is because we added the count state to the dependency array, so useEffect runs whenever the count changes. We can add multiple states in the dependency array, separated by commas. We can also add props in the dependency array. Whenever any of the listed states or props change, the code inside useEffect will run. Now we will cover updating specific properties of an object state in React. We use the spread operator, 3 dots, to copy the existing state and update only the property we need. The spread operator creates a new object, which allows React to detect that the state has changed. Now we will create a new component called departmentObj. We will use it to update specific properties of an object state using the spread operator. Now we will create a function called departmentObj, which will act as our component. Now inside the departmentObj component, we will return a fragment. Now we will export the departmentObj component so it can be used in other files. Now we will import the departmentObj component from its file. Now we will use the departmentObj component by adding its tag in our JSX. Now open departmentObj.jsx and import useState from React. Now we will create state for our object. Data is the state variable that holds the current object. setData is the function used to update that state. Now we will initialize the state using useState with an object. We will initialize the object state with two properties, call1 and call2, both set to 0. Now we will add a button with the text update call1 inside the component. Similarly, we will add another button with the text update call2. Now we will run the project using npm run dev. The project is running at localhost 5173. Let's test it in the browser. As you can see, the two buttons, update call1 and update call2, are showing in the browser. Now we will create an arrow function called update call1. Now we will use setData and pass a function with previous to update the state. Inside the function, we use the spread operator previous to copy all the existing properties of the state object. Then we update call1 by adding the new value to prev call1, while keeping the other properties unchanged. This function update call1 updates the call1 property of the state by adding the given value, while keeping the rest of the state unchanged. Now we will create a similar function update call2 to update the call2 property of the state. Now we will display the value of call1 from the state in a paragraph. Now we will display the value of call2 from the state in a paragraph. We will display call1 and call2 in paragraphs, so we know which value belongs to which column. Now we will add an on-click event to the button to call update call1 when it is clicked. Similarly, we will add an on-click event to the button to call update call2 when it is clicked. Now let's test it in the browser. As you can see, when we click update call1, its value increments. When we click update call2, its value increments. Both update their own values without affecting the other. Now we will pass a parameter named value to the update call1 function. Now instead of adding one, we will add the value parameter. Similarly, we will pass a parameter named value to the update call2 function. Now we will update the buttons on click to call update call1 with the value 2. Similarly, we will update the buttons on click to call update call2 with the value 3. Now let's test it in the browser. As you can see, when we click update call1, its value increments by 2. As you can see, when we click update call2, its value increments by 3. This is about updating specific properties of an object state. We use the spread operator to copy the state and update only what's needed, so React detects the change. Now let's discuss inline styles. Inline style in React means applying CSS directly to an element using the style prop, instead of using a separate CSS file. For inline style, we will implement it in a new component. Let's create a component called inline comp. Now we will create a function called inline comp, which will act as our component. Now inside the inline comp component, we will return a fragment. Now we will export the inline comp component so it can be used in other files. Now open app.jsx and import the inline comp component. Now use the inline comp component with its opening and closing tags. Now we will create a paragraph tag inside the inline comp component. Now we will display the text, "Welcome to React 19, inside the paragraph tag. Now open the terminal and run the command npm run dev. The project is running at localhost 5173. Let's open it in the browser. As you can see, Welcome to React 19 is showing in the browser. Let's try adding a style attribute like an HTML, but it won't work the same way in React. We want to set the text color to blue. Now let's test it in the browser. Nothing is showing because the HTML style attribute doesn't work directly in React. Let's inspect the element to check why. You can see the error. Error. The style prop expects a mapping from style properties to values, not a string. In React, we need to pass an object to the style prop. Now we will pass an object to the style prop. Setting color to blue using double curly braces. Now let's test it in the browser. Oops, nothing is showing again. We might have made a mistake in the code. We missed putting blue in single quotes. Now you can see the text, "Welcome to React 19, styled correctly in blue. Now we will make a copy of the paragraph tag and apply different CSS to it. Let's type background. You'll see different style attributes suggested in camel case. Let's select background color. In React, CSS properties use camel case instead of hyphens like in HTML. Now set background color to red, and let's test it in the browser. You can see the text, "Welcome to React 19, is now showing with a red background. Let's try using the HTML CSS attribute background color with a hyphen. You'll see it won't work in React. Now let's test it in the browser. As you can see, nothing is showing. Let's inspect the element to check the error in the console. You can see the error. The style prop expects a mapping from style properties to values, not a string. The error happens because React style prop expects an object, not a string. We will fix the error by using a camel case object for the style. Now we will use an object to apply styling in React. Now we will create an object called styleDiv and use it for the style, adding CSS attributes inside it. First, add a color attribute to styleDiv and set its value to blue in single quotes. Next, add background color in camel case to the styleDiv object. Set the value of background color to white in single quotes. Now we will create a paragraph tag. In the paragraph tag, we will use the style. Now we will apply the styleDiv object to the paragraph using style. Now we will show the text, "Welcome to React 19, inside the paragraph tag. Now let's test it in the browser. As you can see, the paragraph with the text, "Welcome to React 19, is showing with blue text and a white background. Now change color to white and background color to black, and test it again in the browser. As you can see, the paragraph text is white with a black background. This is all about inline styles in React, which means applying CSS directly to an element using the style prop with a JavaScript object. Now let's discuss external CSS. These are global styles shared across the app, simple to use, but easy to accidentally override. We implement external CSS by creating a separate CSS file and importing it into our React component. CSS modules are component scope styles that stay local, avoiding class name conflicts. We implement CSS modules by creating a module.css file and importing it into the React component, then using the imported styles object for class names. First, we will implement external CSS in our React project. Create a new folder called CSS in your project. Create a file named style.css. We will use this for external styles. Now we will create a CSS class called title. In the .title class, set color blue. Add font size 24px to the .title class. Add font weight bold to the .title class. Now open app.jsx. Now we will import style.css in app.jsx using the complete path. Now comment out the previous JSX code in app.jsx so we can test the external CSS. Now let's create an h1 header tag. In the header h1 tag, display the text, "Welcome to React 19." Now open the terminal and run npm run dev to start the project. The project is running at localhost 5173. Let's open the browser and test it. You can see the text, "Welcome to React 19, displayed in the browser. Now use class name instead of class in the h1 tag. We use class name in React because class is a reserved word in JavaScript, so JSX uses class name to assign CSS classes. Now set class name title in the h1 tag to use the title class we created in style.css. Now let's test it in the browser. You can see the text is now showing in blue, and the external CSS styles are applied successfully. Now open style.css and change the .title class color to red. Now let's test it in the browser. You can see the text, "Welcome to React 19, is now showing in red color. Now we will copy the h1 tag with the title class and paste it into main.jsx. Set its text to "Welcome to React 19 with main.jsx in parentheses. Now let's test it in the browser. As you can see, it's also showing in red with the styles applied, even though we didn't import style.css in main.jsx. That's because external CSS is global and applies to the entire app once it's imported. Now let's remove the h1 tag from main.jsx, since it was only for testing and not for actual coding. Now create a div and place the header h1 tag inside it. Now open style.css and create a new class called card. Now open app.jsx and add the card class to the div using class name. Now let's test it in the browser. Nothing has changed yet. Now we will make changes to the card class in style.css. Now open style.css and add styles inside the card class. We are adding a border to the card with 1px thickness, solid style, and a light gray color #CCC. Add padding, 16px to give space inside the card around its content. Set width, 300px to make the card 300 pixels wide. Add border radius, 8px to give the card rounded corners. Now let's test the card styles in the browser. As you can see, all the styles are perfectly applied to the card. This is how external CSS works in React. External CSS means writing styles in a separate CSS file and applying them globally across the React app. Hope you understand how external CSS work in React. Now we will implement CSS modules by creating a new component specifically for module-based styling. Now let's create a new component called project.jsx. Now we create a function called project, which will be our new component. Inside the project component, we are returning an empty fragment for now. Now we export the project component so it can be used in other files. Now add the text project inside the project component. Now open app.jsx and comment out the old code because we're going to test the project component here. Now import the project component into app.jsx. Now use the project component in app.jsx with opening and closing tags. Now let's test the project component in the browser. Perfect. As you can see, the project component is displaying in the browser. Now we will create a CSS module file for the project component. Create a new file named project.module.css. Now open project.jsx and import the styles from project.module.css. Make sure to provide the correct path when importing project.module.css, otherwise it won't work. Remove the text project and add an h3 tag inside the component. Now add the text website redesign inside the h3 tag. Now let's test it in the browser. As you can see, website redesign is now showing in the browser. Now open project.module.css and add CSS styles for the component. Create a class called .title in project.module.css. Add font size 18px to the .title class. Add font weight bold to the .title class. Now open project.jsx and apply the title class from the CSS module to the h3 tag. Inside class name, provide styles.title to apply the module CSS class. Now let's test it in the browser. As you can see, all the CSS module styles are correctly applied to the h3 text website redesign. Now add a paragraph tag below the heading. Add the text active inside the paragraph tag. Now open project.module.css and add a new CSS class called .status. Set color green to make the status text appear green. Now open project.jsx and apply the CSS module class to the paragraph tag using class name. Now let's test the CSS module styles in the browser. As you can see, all the styles are applied to the paragraph with the text active. Now we will apply the card style. Create a div and place the h3 header and paragraph tag inside that div. Now open project.module.css and add a new class called card. Now open project.jsx and apply the styles.card class to the div using class name. Now open project.module.css and add a border to the .card class with 1px thickness, solid style, and light gray color #CCC. Add padding 16px to the card class to give space inside around its content. Add border radius 8px to the card class to give the card rounded corners. Now let's test the CSS module styles in the browser. As you can see, the beautiful card styles are applied. This is all done using CSS modules. Hope you understand. CSS modules are component scope styles in React that avoid class name conflicts by staying local. External CSS is global and applies styles across the app, while CSS modules are local to a component, preventing class name conflicts. If you're passionate about learning new technologies, Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Tech Stack, and keep learning new skills. Thank you. And remember, consistency is the key to success.